Orders of the day. I recognize the member from Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Speaker. G5.
Order G5, resuming the debate adjourned earlier today on the motion for second reading of Bill 5, an act respecting York Region Wastewater.
For the debate, I recognize the member from Oshawa.
Well, I thank you, Speaker, and I thank my colleagues for a generous and as yet unearned applause. But I'm about to settle into what will be a 1-hour lead, which is my opportunity to present on behalf of the official opposition on Government Bill 5, which is the York Region Wastewater Act 2021. I wear a few hats in this legislature, as we all do. One of them, it is my privilege to serve as the official opposition critic for infrastructure, transportation, and highways. So through the infrastructure lens, I will be looking at this, but also, Speaker, and now that you are a presiding officer of this legislature, we have the opportunity as presiding officers to sometimes serve in interesting capacities in the province. So I'm able to serve as Ontario's representative to the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus, which is a binational body with state representatives, senators, and provincial representatives, me, on issues facing the Great Lakes and the St. Lawrence. So there's a colleague that joins me from the National Assembly in Quebec, and then it is just I who is a part of that executive. And why I mention that is because this has been a really, I've done a lot of homework in a couple of days to prepare for this 1-hour lead on this bill. But it is about wastewater. It's about Great Lakes health, a lot of conversations around environmental concerns, infrastructure concerns, all of those pressures that governments are faced with and communities have to live with. And, you know, at the base of this, or at the heart of this, is an issue around what to do with what no one wants to talk about, that which we flush or that which we clean off of our streets, but our sewage, where does it go? What do we do? What happens when the sewage lagoons get full? What happens, you know, when we're anticipating growth? And Speaker, you may recall that I enjoyed the license plate scenario and the play on words and puns. I am going to do my best as a former grade 7 and 8 teacher. I'm going to do my best to avoid toilet humor today. I'm going to try really, really hard to avoid it because I don't want to make light of this issue. There are lots of considerations. And so I come prepared today with a lot of voices and a lot of opinions from various groups. And so if you're waiting with bated breath, Speaker, to know exactly, you know, which option number 1 or option number 2, I guess all options are number 2 options in this case. But if you are waiting, Speaker, for me to choose, that's not what today is for. Today is to make sure that we hold this government to a higher standard. You know, often we stand in this House and we talk about, you know, government backroom deals, and I just want to make sure that we're not here to discuss government bathroom deals. So, moving forward, Speaker, this York Region Wastewater Act had been essentially tabled kind of the last minute of the last day right before the recess, and it was then Government Bill 306 with a different minister. So we have a new minister in the file. This is the you know, first order of business, basically, in terms of government legislation. A couple of minor changes, but substantially the same. I'll read the explanatory note. The minister's decision-making on the Upper York Sewage Solutions undertaking is suspended, and all actions by the regional municipality of York related to that undertaking are prohibited. So what does all of that mean? This is having to do with, as I said, the Upper York Sewage Solutions project, which I will delve into. But this says that the the new minister can't make any decisions about this project, that the regional municipality of York can't do anything about it, and that the government can't be sued or held liable for anything to do with any of this, or before this or after this. That's the Coles notes, but don't worry, I will delve. So this bill is dealing with the Upper York Sewage Solutions undertaking, which I'm going to read directly from the bill, is a project that includes a water reclamation center, a project-specific phosphorus offsetting program, and modifications to the existing York-Durham sewage system, which was proposed to accommodate population and development growth in the Upper York Wastewater Service Area. Okay? The Upper York Wastewater Service Area, according to this legislation, is the area proposed to be serviced by the York Region Wastewater Project and includes areas in the town of Aurora, East Gwillimbury, and Newmarket. There's so much to this, and my pile is huge here. But this is saying that a long time ago, so about give or take 10 years ago, the region of York started trying to figure out how they were going to solve their wastewater problems, their own in that area, but also looking at projected growth of neighboring communities, and put together an environmental assessment. They have been waiting a long time. They would say 7 years, as I will read later, for a government decision. So this was before the Liberal government for a long time, waiting for a decision, will they or won't they? And it's a $715 million project, and there's obviously a lot riding on can they move forward or not. So what this bill actually does is says that the, quote, the minister shall not make any decisions in respect of the application for the Upper York Sewage Solutions undertaking that was submitted by the region. It says that there's a Section 10 of the Environmental Assessment Act that has to do with deadline provisions that no longer applies and is deemed to have never applied. There's a section, no cause of action arises against the Crown, any current or former member of the Executive Council, or any current or former employee or agent of or advisor to the Crown as a direct or indirect result of the enactment, operation, amendment, or repeal of any provision of this Act, anything done or not done under the authority of or in reliance on this Act, and a new part that has been added since the Bill 306 incarnation, any representation or other conduct that is related directly or indirectly to the application for the Upper York Sewage Solutions undertaking. It goes on with proceedings that are barred since the minister is sort of frozen. Like this is, I haven't seen this before. Has anyone else? The minister has put forward a piece of legislation that says the minister actually isn't allowed to make a decision. So it ties the hands of the minister until this section is repealed. And it says that the region of York isn't allowed to go forward with their plan in any way until that section basically is repealed. And the government has talked about an expert panel and inviting folks yet to be determined, details yet to be determined. So we'll be watching for that and hope that it is indeed a fair and transparent process, not just how those folks are chosen, but who they are and their backgrounds and beliefs and druthers, frankly, to have this expert panel that will at some point yield a recommendation, I guess, or make a decision, and then the minister will have more information, and then hopefully we move forward. The other piece, though, as I had started to say, and then I derailed myself with a totally unintentional pun, option number 1 and option number 2. Option number 1, and again, that's not a comment on better options. That's just the first thing is this Upper York Sewage Solutions plan is a plan that exists, right? It has been before the last government, now this government, waiting for an answer. Highly contentious. Different groups want it to move forward, others do not. And then the other option was one that had been ruled out a long time ago through the environmental assessment process had been ruled out and is now apparently back on the table, and that is to have a southern option or a sewage pipeline down and through the Oak Ridges Moraine to the Duffins Creek area. Seems like not too long ago I was standing here defending Duffins Creek, but this is a same area, give or take, but not the protected wetland. It's this is a existing treatment facility in Durham, in Pickering actually, that releases the effluent into Lake Ontario. And apparently now that option is back on the table. So as you can imagine, you have a water treatment plan on the, will they or won't they, and now all of a sudden, surprise, though this has been a 10-year plan, or in the works for 10 years, excuse me, all of a sudden now we have Durham Region that gets to find out kind of a year ago that maybe they're going to have to take this, I forget the measurements, I'll look at it, but like, well, no, I won't try to remember the numbers. A lot of, trying to pick words that aren't rude. Anyway, a lot of the waste then from the Upper York area that isn't from Durham Region. Now we do take, and the pipeline does exist to get rid of a lot of York Region's waste already, about 80% of it. When you look at a map, you can understand why in terms of land locks and borders and whatnot, but this additional stuff is I can stick with stuff, right? Yeah, okay, just looking to the speaker, is above and beyond. And so you can imagine that folks are not happy. And also they were surprised. So that's kind of the background, and I'm happy to come back to the section about the government protecting itself. I may get into that a little bit later, especially since the last version of it, now you're adding that any representation or any conduct, the government can't be on the hook for it. The proceedings are barred. No proceeding, including but not limited to any proceeding for remedy in contract, restitution, unjust enrichment, tort, misfeasance, bad faith, trust or fiduciary obligation, and any remedy under any statute that is directly or indirectly based on or related to anything referred to in subsection 1. There's also a retroactive clause. It's just, I'm not allowed, Speaker, to suggest that the government would ever do anything that would break the law. That would be unparliamentary. But I have to wonder why it's been added into legislation. I mean, did they know something we don't? Is there a lawsuit waiting in the wings? Is there an intent to, I don't know. So anyway, I will leave that there, but there it is in legislation. So covered that. So, and actually, if any of the government members would like a refresher, there was a great article earlier in September. The government has lost more than a dozen court cases, and here's a list. So there were a few reminders in there. One of them that I will highlight, though, just as I'm talking about that indemnity clause and the self-preservation, self-protection. On this list, number 9, shielding government from negligent suits. It says, the government lost its appeal of a $30 million class action award related to Ontario's jail use of administrative segregation, a form of solitary confinement. The government fought the case in part by invoking new legislation it introduced in 2019 that aimed to give the province broader immunity from negligence lawsuits. However, in its March 2021 decision, the Ontario Court of Appeal ruled that the operations of government cannot be shielded from liability claims. Just a reminder while we're here. But Speaker, I'm going to try and bring it back to sort of focus on the overview, because my colleagues were kind of trying to ask a bit more about this, a bit of the background. So I'm going to do my best to distill it down and then branch into some of the other concerns. But it is an odd piece of legislation. So it really just seems like the The purpose is to manage what seems to be a pretty clear political problem for this government. It's basically a stop work order on what is a controversial municipal wastewater project in York Region. And for whatever reason, this government has assumed control over that municipal project, which is pretty unusual, frankly, that the government just kind of takes over that local municipal infrastructure. The retroactively blocking of lawsuits against this government related to any actions having to do with any of this before, after, during is quite remarkable. I'd say heavy-handed. And as I said, the one key difference that I highlighted from the last bill that was introduced on our way out the door before summer recess, this new bill blocks lawsuits related to government misrepresentations or misconduct, or representations or conduct. But a bit of background, the Upper York Sewage Solutions project is, as I said, a proposed $715 million municipal wastewater project, and it would construct a new sewage treatment plant in East Gwillimbury, which would discharge the treated wastewater, called effluent, into the Lake Simcoe watershed. And its purpose is to accommodate, I guess, or deal with the waste of 153,000 new residents that the provincial government plans for East Gwillimbury, Newmarket and Aurora. So folks that aren't living there yet will have waste requirements, and so this is part of that. There are rural communities in and around the Greenbelt that are currently serviced by lagoons that are near or at capacity. So this has been, as I said, a project that's been in development for over a decade, and York Region has waited 5 or 7 years or so, waited a long time for an answer. It has actually cost the folks in York Region, it has cost them, at last count, $100 million, which is a lot of money to put to something that now the government has tabled legislation that says they can't move forward and no decision can be rendered. However, in June 2020, there was a letter that was sent from the then Minister of Environment, Conservation and Parks that informed York Region that the provincial government was essentially taking over the planning for the project. So we're not really sure under what authority the government would assume this kind of control over a municipal project. And the letter further said, oh, by the way, this is a secretive letter, like everything has been like non-disclosures and things like that. So anyway, a lot of folks were not aware of these things until relatively recently. But the letter said the government was considering an alternative proposal to run a big sewage pipe from Upper York through the Oak Ridges Moraine to the Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant in Durham. And as I said, that had been an option that was screened out during the former EA process. And fun fact, there has been no updated environmental assessment or cost, benefit, risk analysis that has been provided for the government's Durham big pipe alternative. So this is where we are now, with the government talking about an expert panel that they are planning to convene to advise on wastewater solutions for York and Durham. We had the opportunity this morning to listen to the hour speech of the parliamentary assistant, and I applaud her for the hour. And there were some pieces in there that I'm hoping to tease out as we continue on. Some of the, the rationale for why we're here, I'd like to have a better understanding, because I'm planning to poke some holes in some of the things I've heard. So I'm looking forward to the questions and responses at the end of this. But Speaker, folks are on both sides of this issue. There's actually more than just those two sides. The environmental groups and many community folks are saying that it's a false choice between option 1 and option 2, between the Upper York Sewage Solutions project and the Durham southern route, the Durham pipe. This is a conversation about fundamental planning and urban sprawl, and that all municipalities really have factored in their own growth and been required to submit plans and really look at that carefully and thoughtfully. It's that age-old conversation around intensification and utilization and appropriate planning of community resources and infrastructure versus urban sprawl, developer wish lists, kind of like, ooh, there's somewhere new that has never been developed, let's throw everything there, rather than utilizing what we have and planning for a sustainable future. So that's sort of option number 3 is something else. So I'm going to present all of them today because the environmental groups have, criticized these plans that direct the growth to these rural areas that would be served by the you may hear it called the UYSS, but the Upper York Sewage Solutions project, because we're talking about threatening farmland, water systems, the integrity of the greenbelt, and it would seem that it's said over and over that the true beneficiaries of that project are those well-connected land speculators, big developers who are, always seeking to profit, and that's a fair comment. They're in it to make money and build. So, but to make profit from publicly funded infrastructure, we want to make sure that that maybe this expert panel looks very clearly at all of the pieces, not just the 2. So I'm going. Oh, I'm apparently just throwing my notes on the floor. I hope I don't need that one again. But there's been a lot said and a lot written in local media and provincial publications. I have stuff here from Barrie Today, from Newmarket Today, East Gwillimbury, Innisfil, all of the areas that the member opposite is well acquainted with. It's her stomping ground, I would say. And we heard a lot about that this morning. But from the Barrie Today, controversial Upper York Sewage Solutions stuck in perpetual limbo. It says the massive sewage facility proposed by York Region has been in the works since 2008, but is stalled with successive provincial governments refusing to approve or reject a 2014 environmental assessment. The Upper York Sewage Solutions project has garnered years-long opposition. Area municipalities, the Chippewas of Georgina Island, and environmental organizations like the Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition have all questioned the Upper York solution, concerned about the impact it could have on Lake Simcoe. A Change.org petition asking the government to reject the proposal garnered more than 35,000 signatures. The province has proposed an alternative: expand the lines to a plant at Duffin Creek, jointly operated by York and Durham regions. The plant already handles some York Region sewage. Durham's Director of Environmental Services, John Presta, is quoted as saying, quote, "It has to be noted that there hasn't been any refined planning on how that's going to get done or engineering to look at some of the impacts bringing down a pipe to transfer sewage. It appears from a conceptual level that it's going to be more expensive," end quote. There's steadfast opposition. There are folks who are desperate to have it. I appreciate that the government finds itself in a mess, part of which arguably they inherited from the last government that, ragged the puck for, I don't know, how many years? A lot. So I acknowledge, especially from reading all of the, the opinions and pulling from the expertise of various groups, that this does need to be the right solution. But let's make sure that at the heart of it, it's about sustainability, environmental protections, and long-range growth plans, not just a matter of, I hope it's not, but not just a matter of money talks and, who owns what land and stands to profit. So, Speaker, another article by Emma McIntosh from this past June. Again, the Ontario government is seeking to punt the question of what to do with millions of litres of Greater Toronto Area sewage to an expert panel. York Region is, quote, extremely disappointed in the proposed bill, says Mike Rabo, its Director of Capital Planning and Delivery for Environmental Services, in a statement Monday. The municipality has already spent $100 million on the project, and the province's failure to make a decision is, quote, disrupting planned employment and residential growth, end quote, he said. The Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, located on an island in Lake Simcoe, wants more details before agreeing to participate in the panel, said the nation's Environmental Department Manager Brandon Stiles. The community is currently working to remedy a boil water advisory and has long opposed the project. He said, quote, we're shrouded in mystery, basically, on what the next steps look like, end quote. I hope that meaningful consultation doesn't just look like, you know, token engagement or a quick phone call to make sure that can be crossed off the list that, you know, First Nations folks were consulted. Because what we're seeing here with the opportunity, as the government, you know, sort of celebrates to engage and invite folks into this expert panel, it's interesting to hear from this Brandon Stiles, the voice of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, that they're not sure what their role might be or what the terms would be. And so I certainly encourage the government to clarify, not only for them, but for everyone else. As folks have said, it doesn't matter which one they pick, it's not going to work out well. You know, the officials at the region, so again quoting, officials at the region and the Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority have said they believe the treated effluent would be clean enough to improve water quality on the river. But last year, the government sent the project in another direction, telling York Region it would rather see the sewage flow south to Lake Ontario. And under that plan, the effluent would be sent to the Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant in Durham Region. So let's talk about that for a minute. You have Lake Simcoe, and I've got lots of voices here that want to keep it safe and clean and protected. So do I. But we also have Lake Ontario, which we all want to see safe and clean and protected. These are our Great Lakes, and I'm going to go back to that hat I was telling you about that I wear as an executive member on the Great Lakes and St. Lawrence Legislative Caucus. That's not a partisan space. It's binational and it's nonpartisan, and it is intended to share best practices and you know, focus on legislation and opportunities to protect the health and wellness and future of the Great Lakes, the tributaries, the watersheds that feed the Great Lakes. You know, picking one over the other rather than really looking at what is best for, you know, the health of the Great Lakes generally and the health of all Ontarians, that has to be the priority of this government. So Lake Ontario, again quoting from this article, Lake Ontario is a bigger body of water, but the treatment plant there isn't as rigorous as what York Region is proposing. That path could also require digging into the Oak Ridges Moraine, a portion of the protected greenbelt. Now, York Region says it can't clean up a series of lagoons filled with raw sewage until the question of how to expand its wastewater system is resolved. Both regions lie in the vote-rich 905, a region where the Progressive Conservatives must maintain strong support if they want to win the next election scheduled for June 2022. People have lots of thoughts on what is driving any of these decisions. So again, my challenge to this government, to the member opposite who spoke this morning on this, is to make this a transparent and open process and make sure that none of us actually think that these are backroom deals or that we're, you know, beholden to the development industry and you know, big money. Like, we all want Ontario to be a safe and healthful place for generations. And we all will stand here and talk about, you know, I have a stand-up paddleboard, but others have been talking about canoeing or kayaking or what have you, and we all love and enjoy the lakes. I believe we all have that in common without needing to take a survey. But let's actually stop and think how we're actually willing to protect them and what we're willing to do to ensure that they're protected. put in the work, invest the time, invest the money. More on that later, Speaker. And then this section, environmentalists have questioned why York Region is seeking to build communities it doesn't have the capacity to handle. They say the sewage skirmish is emblematic of a larger problem, provincial growth targets that experts have criticized for being too aggressive. The same population targets are being used as a rationale for other contentious projects like the Bradford Bypass. The Chippewas of Georgina Island note that Lake Ontario is also part of their traditional territory. They say it would also require consultation and review. Municipalities in Durham have said that they are unwilling to bear the dirty fallout of development happening somewhere else. So, Speaker, I think you get the point. It's a tangled mess, and I'm glad that we're standing here talking, but I won't tell you how little sleep I got last night in preparing for this, because this bill, just got dropped right before we left, and then a new one newly introduced. That when I called folks in the community of Durham, in the region of Durham, they didn't know this was going to be first order of business, right? So again, what does consultation look like? And I'm throwing my notes on the floor, Speaker. Not for effect, just accidentally. You'll know when it's for effect. So I asked a couple of questions of the last minister, and I'm telling you right now, I'm pretty excited to retable those questions for the new minister, and I'm hoping for a different answer. Thank you very much. Don't go far; it could happen again. I had tabled what we call written questions or order paper questions. Questions 296 and 297 for those following along at home, and I'm going to read them. The first one: would the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks provide details with respect to the Upper York Sewage Solutions project, identifying the estimated financial and environmental costs of the Minister's proposed design change that would run a sewer pipeline through the Oak Ridges Moraine to the Duffin Creek Water Pollution Control Plant, clarifying who will pay these costs, providing a cost-benefit risk assessment to justify these costs? That was the first question. The second question was, would the Minister of the Environment, Conservation and Parks provide details with respect to the Upper York Sewage Solutions project, explaining the lack of public consultation prior to announcing this proposed change, and clarifying under what authority the provincial government is assuming such control over a municipal infrastructure project? So usually, when we table these written questions, however many days the table could tell me, but anyway, there's a maximum number of days within which the government has the opportunity to respond. I tabled 2 questions. I got 1 answer, and I even got an answer that almost, I'd have to really compare, but it appears to be identical to kind of what the government is their statements to the press. So, so much for parliamentary privilege or whatnot. So I ask thoughtful questions, and I get this 1 answer to both of them. 1 answer to both different questions. It says, York Region identified that their current wastewater system will require additional wastewater capacity to service expected population growth in Newmarket and East Gwillimbury. A decision has not been made on the Upper York Sewage Solutions environmental assessment application. The government is committed to working with York Region to accommodate growth in a protective way. I'm going to put an asterisk there. They didn't say working with Durham Region, but anyway. Appropriate environmental protection for any servicing solution will be required in accordance with provincial environmental legislation. Maybe. And our government remains committed to protecting and restoring Ontario's lakes and waterways. I don't want them to have to restore them if they're the ones who have done the harm. So maybe avoid the harm first. But I do like the sound of protecting. A lot missing there, though. I had asked specific questions around who will bear the cost, what would those look like, why the lack of public consultation. Speaking of consultation and duty to consult, the Upper York Sewage Solutions decision, and this is back in 2018 that this was signed, and the font is small, so I'm going to do my best, Speaker. This is from the this is the official decision of the Upper York Sewage Solutions proposal Quote, "This is the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nations official decision of the Upper York Sewage Solutions proposed by York Region to the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry to build and operate a sewage plant that will dump 40 million litres of treated sewage daily into Lake Simcoe within the traditional territories of the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation. This project is known as the Upper York Sewage Solutions. The project is proposed to be constructed by the Holland River, where pollution will flow into Lake Simcoe, further contaminating Georgina Island's already taxed water source. The territory is traditionally known by locals," the font gets small, "as Ashaniyang, or people of the shining waters, and it is not only a life source but a spiritual place for the Chippewa people." It goes on to express very clearly that it is opposed to this project, and I'll read something else from them. Quote, "Imagine not being able to drink from your tap water for over 2 years and finding out that the Ontario Ministry of the Environment and Climate Change, at the time, received a proposal that will dump over 40 million litres of treated sewage daily into your only source of water. This is exactly what the people of Georgina Island First Nation have been dealing with. Georgina Island First Nation have been raising concerns about the impacts of the proposed Upper York Sewage Solutions treatment plant project on the Lake Simcoe watershed. The York Region municipality is claiming that the project will have no adverse impacts on the lake." They object to this proposal and outline their concerns. Homeland Declaration, I'm going to pull bits and parts here, but it is absolutely worth the read. Quote, "We have the right to free, prior and informed consent to developments on our lands and waters, and will exercise our jurisdiction on a nation-to-nation basis. We have the right to consultation where it must be carried out with deep and mutual respect through fair, independent, impartial, open and transparent processes." End quote. So the government has said, and they can correct me because I'm not going to quote them directly, but it's my impression that the government is stopping the presses and halting this decision, and as we read, punting it to an expert panel, partly because, as they have said, that they haven't, that the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation had not been properly consulted. That seems to be a piece of this. They can correct me if I'm wrong. And I won't argue that, because anything that I have read in different publications and articles is that they have been sort of caught off guard or surprised by things, and rather than being involved in various parts of this process. Okay, but also, as we read earlier, the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation acknowledge or highlight the fact that Lake Ontario is also part of their traditional territory. Well, the Mississaugas of Scugog Island First Nation also I haven't heard discussed in this House yet. If we're going to be shipping refuse, piping it, most governments shovel it, but here we have it piping, to Lake Ontario, where is this rush and demand from this government to consult with First Nations impacted by that southern alternative decision, by the southern route and that pipeline, right? That sewage pipeline. Yeah, it's not a matter of picking and choosing with whom. It is a duty to consult with First Nations that are impacted by this or an alternative, I'll say, solution. But Speaker, so I've shared some of the voice from the Chippewas of Georgina Island First Nation, and they have been wonderfully vocal on this. The community of Georgina stands with them in opposition to the Upper York Sewage Solutions project. But here I have a different voice. Oh, no, this actually, sorry, this connects to what I had been saying about that duty to consult and where we are right now. So this summer, in the wake of the tabling of Bill then 306, the early Bill 5, quote, "The decision left York Region politicians fuming and caught the Chippewas of Georgina Island off guard. Georgina Island Environmental Coordinator Brandon Stiles said Chief Donna Big Canoe was surprised to learn about the expert advisory panel shortly before it was announced by the province. While they have been asked to participate, Stiles said Georgina Island is waiting for more information in the terms of reference of the panel before deciding if they will participate. I don't actually think that it's good form, frankly, I'm just speaking freely here, for the government to say, oh, but they're going to have a seat at the table. The First Nation says, well, we don't really know what it's about. So again, you know, no decisions about us without us we hear from a lot of community groups, but certainly First Nations shouldn't have to keep championing their rights. By this point, we should all be well aware of what meaningful consultation needs to look like. While the province said that the delay on a decision on the Upper York Sewage Solutions was because of its duty to consult with the Chippewas of Georgina Island, Stiles said there hasn't been what he would call close consultation on the project. Okay. So I'll let that stand, and hopefully it is remedied. As I mentioned earlier, Speaker, different municipalities have different opinions on what to do. Politicians from York Region, Newmarket, Aurora, and East Gwillimbury are furious that this long-delayed project has been halted, and anyone in this room can understand why. But politicians from Durham Region are furious that the government, you know, would stick them with York Region sewage, surprise them with, I would say. And Durham taxpayers are possibly going to be forced to pick up some of the costs. We don't know. Ajax in the community there, while it's a Pickering plant, the community of Ajax along the waterfront there already struggles with phosphorus-related algae issues. Folks who haven't been consulted, there's a lot going on. There is no plan B. Newmarket lacks water capacity alternatives to controversial sewage plant, and this from Newmarket today. And they're not sure what they're going to do. He has said, Newmarket Mayor John Taylor said the province is rumoured to favour a southern solution to increase capacity at an existing Durham Region plant, but that would require a new application process, delaying things further. And he said he has speculated that the province might be waiting for the next provincial election in June 2022 to resolve the controversial issue. He said, quote, "We're in a very constrained atmosphere. It's their responsibility to make a choice even with the political challenge." As wastewater plant advisor Tracy Kerrigan has said, there is no plan B. We're doing everything we can to bridge the gap in anticipation of some sort of decision from the province. Innisfil rejects motion to challenge York Region's Lake Simcoe Sewage Solutions project. Innisfil Town Council, in a close vote, has decided not to challenge the Upper York Sewage Solutions project, which would pump sewage from northern York Region to a new state-of-the-art treatment facility before discharging the effluent into Lake Simcoe. I'm just kind of sharing headlines right now because there's a lot. The member opposite is nodding because this is her neck of the woods. And I'll read a little bit here now, switching to the Durham perspective, and this from Durham Radio News, an article from this past July. Durham officials against potential sewage pipeline from York Region to Pickering Lakefront. The town of Ajax argues effluent from the facility is responsible for waves of green algae washing up along the lakeshore and subsequently rotting. Quote, "We have 7 kilometres of publicly owned waterfront in Ajax," said Mayor Sean Collier. "We're very proud of it. We've invested a lot of money in that, and to not be able to use it, enjoy it because of the nuisance algae that has been washing up is an enormous problem." Folks who talk about the impact on Lake Simcoe say very similar things about they're concerned about what this effluent will mean to the ecosystems there. John Presta, Director of Environmental Services for Durham Region, has said they've spent a lot of money and time to conduct that environmental assessment, referring to the Upper York Sewage Solutions plan. Quote, "Who's paying to twin the big pipe and bring the sewage down here?" asks Mayor Sean Collier. Quote, "That question has been asked by us in the region many times, but has not been answered." I also asked it in my written question, didn't get an answer. But as John Pressa said, quote, it would be a Region of York project. It's in the order of $800 million to $100 billion for them to divert sewage down to Duffin Creek. So that number is based on estimated costs. But the Region of Durham has no idea because they were just, I will not say they were looped in. They heard about this, what, a year ago? October, give or take a year ago, that they could be on the hook for all of this Upper York waste. It's a lot of money. And the thing is, in Durham Region, Speaker, you know, our population is going to double in however many years it is. We've got our growth plans in the Durham Region, and the infrastructure set to grow with it. You know, there's a twinning of the pipe that is happening anyway to ensure sort of handled redundancy and capacity. But if we're going to factor in all of this additional waste, well, then that speeds up how when we would need to build new infrastructure or expand or broaden the capacity or whatever is involved. And that cost, is that to be borne by the Durham Region taxpayer? What does that look like? We don't know. We just found out. By the way, government, and I haven't had the chance to be government yet, but I don't think that that is how you build strong and positive partnerships with municipalities. But I'm hazarding a guess there. Gosh, so many thoughts, so many voices, and they are all on, you know, different sides. And the push and pull here is the struggle is real, Speaker. Durham Regional Council adopted a resolution that if the province goes ahead with the Lake Ontario option, Durham's residents should not have to pay for any financial implications, such as any sped-up expansion at Duffin Creek to deal with the extra sewage. As well, the region called for the same environmental protections at Duffin Creek as those at Upper York Sewage Solutions. That would seem only fair. In the Durham perspective, also, you know, they are supportive of the Upper York Sewage Solutions project. You know, that York has invested all this time and energy, $100 million so far, 10 years of waiting. We've known about this less than a year, but certainly they are supportive of the Region of York. And it says, Durham Region has also said that Durham is currently operating the Duffin Creek plant to meet the objectives within the Phosphorus Reduction Action Plan and ensure wastewater treatment in the most environmentally and financially responsible way. So any plant upgrades have already been factored in, but again, not without this additional stuff, waste. York Region has, so from Durham, York Region has invested more than a decade of study and planning under the process set out in the province's Environmental Assessment Act at a cost exceeding $100 million to date. This has been more than a 10-year process. York Region began working on the Upper York Sewage Solution project in 2009. 7 years have passed since York Region submitted the final environmental assessment report. There has been no such analysis and no environmental assessment to study the effect on the York-Durham sewage system. See if I can find something here. So Ajax Council, I'm going to share some of their thoughts from a letter dated in January. Ajax Council strongly opposed the Lake Ontario option for York Region effluent. They have sent a letter to the ministry. Ajax Council requests that the Chippewas of Georgina Island and any impacted Durham Region Indigenous peoples, as appropriate, continue to be consulted as full partners in the process, and that their concerns be respected and considered in all decision-making. The expert panel will have their work cut out for them, I think. Some of the community comments. You know how they say not to read the comments? Well, sometimes when you're an opposition member and you're reading the comments about government legislation, it's actually quite worthwhile to read the comments. So Joanna Powell in a comment in a public forum, had said, "We need new ways of treating our waste, ways that do not pollute our precious and limited water resources. This debate has been going on for more than a decade. Why isn't there a new answer, a new choice besides A or B?" Betsy Cornwell has said, "We can no longer, quote, solve our human excrement problem by diverting it, as the Victorian sewage system did by dumping it into the Thames. Have we not managed to advance beyond that out of sight, smell, out of mind set?" She goes on to say, "California, with its semi-perpetual state of drought, has been forced to recycle its wastewater. It is only exploitative capitalism that prevents us from pursuing the, quote, common good. Developers want to wreak their profit-making on the cheap. Make them pay for the destructive process. Make them meet conditions for building permits that solve this crisis of human waste and human greed." Louis Bertrand said, "The bit about the vote-rich 905 area is exactly what it's all about. Most municipal and provincial politicians, red or blue, doesn't matter, in that area receive substantial campaign contributions from donors linked to sprawl-friendly house builders and road construction companies. These are just folks out there and how they perceive this." So a reminder, as this government is putting together an expert panel that it says wants to achieve something and come up with a better recommendation, give them the ability in your terms of reference and all that. Let them actually look at different options, and maybe leave them out of those back rooms with developers. Like, let them actually look at the science and talk to folks and see what else is out there, so that we can have healthier communities. I have something here that was a joint submission from Environmental Defence, Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, Save the Maskinonge, Pickering, Ajax, Citizens Together Protecting Our Water, or PACT POW, Simcoe County Greenbelt Coalition. And they sent this to Minister Clark, and it's a joint submission. They have said, "Any approach adopted for the treatment and disposal of additional sewage and wastewater from Upper York Region must meet the following minimum criteria. It must not result in the creation of new sewage plants or outflows on Lake Simcoe. It must not result in the running of new sewage pipe or similar infrastructure through the Oak Ridges Moraine or any environmentally sensitive areas. It must not increase nutrient loading in Lake Simcoe. It must not increase nutrient loading or increase temperature in Duffins Creek or any tributary to Lake Ontario or Lake Simcoe." And then they go on to say, "As Ontario and the affected municipalities are plainly unable to demonstrate that either of the two main present options for directing the sewage pipe satisfy these criteria, we submit that neither of them should be pursued." And there we are back to, it's not just, option one or option two, it's look at something new. They've gone on to say, "Ontario and relevant municipalities have already put years of study and negotiation into protecting, restoring Lake Simcoe and safeguarding Oak Ridges Moraine in perpetuity. These protections should be treated as the abstract and permanent bounds for growth in the region. Only such development should take place as can be undertaken without infringing them. Neither Ontario nor any party has demonstrated or offered any reason to hope that sewage from Upper York Region can be directed to Lake Ontario without gravely compromising the Oak Ridges Moraine." Speaker, they've also said, "Given the importance of the Oak Ridges Moraine and the scale of infrastructure and excavation required to convey sewage from Upper York Region, the onus must be on proponents to demonstrate that there will be no damage to ecological and hydrological functions. Neither the government nor any of the affected municipalities has done anything approaching the work required to accomplish this." So I had mentioned sprawl earlier and talked about intensification versus urban sprawl. So I'm going to read this again from this joint submission from the Environmental Voices. "As it has not been demonstrated that either of the two most developed options for disposing of additional wastewater from Upper York Region protects the Oak Ridges Moraine, Lake Simcoe and Duffins Creek, the most prudent approach is to cease expansion of sewage output in that part of the region. We submit that this can be accomplished without compromising the public interest because there is no real need for such expansion. First, as Environmental Defence has said elsewhere, there is ample capacity for Ontario to accommodate all the new Greater Toronto Area households created from now until 2051. within the GTA's existing neighbourhoods and built-up areas. There is no sound justification for directing new GTA households to use Upper York Region in particular, and certainly no justification for accommodating any demand that does not arise outside existing neighbourhoods in the area. Governments should use their legislative authority and funding that would otherwise be directed to treatment facilities to drive upstream reductions in household and industrial wastewater volumes, such as reuse of low-grade wastewater. There's a lot to that, and that's bold. Right? That is saying, okay, well, all of this time and attention spent here, what if that was in the wrong direction? Rescue Lake Simcoe Coalition, you know, they'd love me to ask you when the government will release the results of the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. I think they were expecting that this summer. They'd love to know after all the, you know, the consultation. Then that consultation window is closed, but then where are the results of that? Sprawl. How on earth have I run out of time? I could talk about sprawl all day. I'll read this. Environmentalists say the demand for new sewage capacity is a symptom of the province's flawed approach to development. Quote, "This is part of a bigger issue we're calling the big sprawl, and we're seeing these infrastructure issues across the province," said Phil Poppin, a program manager for advocacy group Environmental Defence. The province's insistence on pushing forward with either of these options is part of their agenda of diverting population and job growth to areas that will make land speculators and sprawl developers richer, rather than diverting those funds to the existing neighbourhoods which desperately need investments to improve services and aging infrastructure. Ajax Regional Councillor Joanne Dias said if the province wants to add another pipe to bring more sewage, they should also upgrade the technology used to treat 630 megalitres of sewage. If they twin that pipe, they're going to add a lot of effluent going into the lake, she said. The concerns are saying if we've got this massive concern over here and all of this investment that's needed just to handle what we have, why aren't we doing that? Why are we now creating massive and new problems? The sprawl conversation is who is driving that? Who benefits? The MPP for Niagara Centre wrote a letter to the Auditor General of Ontario inviting her office to investigate why the government maintains one set of municipal growth projections for its own while requiring municipalities to use a different set for land use planning purposes, and to look at land use planning, to look at sprawl, to look at what is driving that. You know, planning experts have criticized the government's growth projections. It's not a matter of simple inflation. It's sort of that motivation behind, or what numbers are we using. And we've called for a value for money audit of the methodology and accuracy of the government's land needs assessments. Again, the province has trust issues with this government. So prove to us that not everything is you know, based on who you play golf with. You've got a chance here with this expert panel. Who are you going to pick? This morning, Speaker, I asked a question of the parliamentary assistant about the phosphorus reduction or the phosphorus reclamation plant. The feds are ponying up about $16 million to cover the cost, which would remove massive amounts of phosphorus from the Holland River and just do a remarkable job of cleaning up and protecting the fresh water. And so this is a big deal. But York Region has said that they can't move forward with this project that, as the member opposite called a game changer this morning, they can't move forward with that project unless the province approves the Upper York Sewage Solutions environmental assessment. Well, this bill before us says that that's basically illegal until it's repealed. So we're at an impasse. So you have different, in this case, councillors, but communities who are calling on the government to put money into this. That if the region of York won't pay their half of this for the reclamation plant, will the province? So I asked that, and I heard about advocacy and community need, but I again will ask, and I know the ministry and the government has not as it says here, at the time of this writing, the ministry does not have a position whether or not they will actually cover that cost and make that happen. Speaker, the Bradford bypass, urban sprawl, I think my colleague is going to talk later about boundaries. Let's talk about clean water. Let's talk about the future. Let's not talk about an EA that is only looked at 1 year. Let's talk about looking at the future. And I know people are going to get up and talk about swimming and fishing and enjoying the lakes, but it's not just about us, eh? Like, it's about the future generations and ensuring not just the growth of where we put those houses, but that the lakes are healthy and well, not just meeting our needs, that we are meeting their needs. And so this is a bigger conversation. I'd hate to waste this opportunity to talk about the fact that we have an opportunity to figure out waste solutions, maybe be a bit bold, but to consult with folks to come up with the right way to move forward to protect all of our ecosystems, the health of our children and our communities for now and for many generations to come. So I encourage the government to take that to heart as they move forward with this piece of legislation. Thank you, Speaker.
Thank you. That finishes the lead for the official opposition. We now move to questions and comments, and I look to the member from Waterloo.
Kitchener-Conestoga.
Kitchener-Conestoga.
Thank you, Speaker. Well, I may not agree with everything that the member from Oshawa brought up in her debate today. Her last statement, though, I do agree with. When we talk about clean water, making sure that it's enjoyable for generations to come, I'm going to have like I said earlier, a chance to debate this bill here in the House, and I am going to talk about swimming and fishing, but I'm also going to talk about my children and how they really enjoy being able to use our wonderful waterways here in the province. And my question then to the member is, we do have an opportunity to do something good here and get things right. So why would we want to use an environmental assessment that is 7 years old, and that data is, 10 years old, and is looking back even from the process to when that started is well over 10 years old. So my question is, wouldn't it be more prudent to have more up-to-date data, make sure we're using the best technology to make sure that for generations to come, they can enjoy and use the water as well?
Great question.
I return to the member from Oshawa.
That is an interesting choice of questions for the member. I will make sure that I'm here also to hear about him talk about swimming and fishing and his kids. I appreciate that. So to say that this environmental assessment is part of the impetus for this change, when we see the government kind of picking and choosing with other environmental issues that, if I look at the Bradford bypass and the public consultation, haven't occurred since the 1990s, but that's okay. That's not out of date. Like, let's just move forward with that, right? So it's the picking and choosing that I will put it back on this government.
Answer.
If your policy is going to be current and up to date and factor in environmental concerns, then look at the Bradford bypass and use that same lens. Like, have at it.
Thank you. Further questions and comment? I will look to the member from London West.
Thank you very much, Speaker. Always impressed by the member for Oshawa's grasp of policy files and also her knowledge of her local communities. But I think her speech really illustrated the pitfalls of governments approving sprawl developments without addressing infrastructure needs first. I wondered if the member would like to comment on what good planning should look like versus the process that that resulted in this bill undertaken by both previous Liberal and Conservative governments.
Thank you. The member from Oshawa.
Yes, but I only have a minute to respond to you. Okay, on the face of it, good planning would be open and transparent. All the non-disclosure agreements and the backroom deals, and I can make a joke about this wastewater issue being a bathroom deal, but it isn't funny, right? The idea of closed doors and people not knowing, or groups that deserve to be consulted, or those who actually, where the government has a duty to consult with them, that they shouldn't be surprised, right? That you know, planning decisions should be made on people who are qualified, be made alongside and with the people who are qualified. So actual community planners, it's not just they go to school for that, they've been doing this a long time. And so looking at capacity issues, growth plans, all of that, for it to be meaningful, it should actually be relevant and current. To the member earlier, his point, I agree that things should be current, but factoring in environmental considerations, not picking and choosing, not making like the Bradford bypass exempt, you know, from restrictions or whatever I'm trying to say. Anyway, I'm out of time, but good planning would actually be good planning.
Thank you. Further questions or comments? I turn to the member from Barrie Innisfil.
Thank you, Speaker. So thank you to the member for her long speech and giving shout-outs to my area and, of course, beautiful Lake Simcoe, which I talked a lot about. But she's made it clear in previous remarks and today, you know, obviously you don't want this in your backyard. And so we can't base it off of NIMBYism and our, you know, what we do or do not want. We have to base it on science. So what do you tell all Ontarians when, you know, they're saying, oh, yeah, they don't want this in their backyard? But shouldn't we be basing these things on science rather than just politics and gut instincts?
Turn to the member from Oshawa.
I am so excited to talk about science being the basis for decision making. That would be a wonderful, wonderful thing to have, not just in this House, but across the province, across the country, around the world even. So the not in my backyard is a real thing for, I think, every community, but everyone, you know, we can't all have outhouses in our backyards, so there needs to be a more sustainable solution. Obviously, the folks in the Lake Simcoe area, there seems to be a lot of political pressure up there to not have the Upper York waste be deposited into Lake Simcoe, cutting into the Oak Ridges Moraine. Then do us the same courtesy and do that environmental, not just environmental assessment, but due diligence. If that is actually where the government is pushing, if that's what the government wants, then say it, because folks are surprised. And you know, the whispers that are happening around this is that this is the solution. This pipeline to Lake Ontario seems to be the government druthers. Prove us wrong. Show us the science. Show us the actual homework, so that we know where on earth this is coming from.
Further questions? The member from Algoma, Manitoulin.
Thank you, Speaker. Again, we're just a float canoe. We're just a canoe float away. When we talk about water, I can't help but think of an individual which is from the Wikwemikong traditional lands, and she has been a water protector. And I don't have to talk to her, but she does have an influence on how I present myself here in this House when I'm speaking about water, because she has been protecting waterways and speaking about waterways for a very long time and the importance of it. So I know she would have trouble with this, and this is the question that I want to ask the member, is that this present Bill 5 is very similar, if not identically named, as Bill 306. However, the stark difference in this bill is that this bill will block any lawsuits related to government misrepresentation and misconduct. Now, I know that my friend Autumn would have a lot of problems with this. Why would the government introduce or go down a path where they're going to have to protect themselves from wrongdoing? If this is a good bill that stands on its own, which is going to be based on science, why do we have to put these mechanisms in a law to protect wrongdoing going forward?
The member from Oshawa.
Your guess is as good as mine, but I think it sends a message to folks that maybe the government should consider. If a government's going to put into legislation so thoroughly all the proceedings barred and, you know, no cause of action may arise against the Crown, and all of the ways that the government can protect itself from any challenge. Why you're putting it in there, I can't speak to that. I don't think that it speaks to trust, frankly, and maybe the government should sit down and take a long, hard look in the mirror.
Further questions? The member from Eglinton Lawrence.
Thank you, Speaker. And thank you to the member opposite for her lead speech and all the comments she made. I was listening very intently, and I understood you to say that, that you appreciate the fact that this will make up-to-date current scientific information available. And I also heard you say that you think planning should be done by experts, and that's, of course, what the intention of this advisory panel is. And finally, I think you did talk quite a bit about how important it was to consult with impacted communities, especially with our First Nations, which have not been consulted with up until this point in time in the process. So I would just ask the member opposite why she can't support this legislation, seeing as how it helps with all of the things that you've identified as so important.
Member from Oshawa.
Thank you. Thank you for the chance to get up and say they're not your First Nations, first. Second of all, I didn't say that all of this expert opinion will be made available. I said I hope it is. Like, no offense, but I don't trust you. So let's hope that whatever comes from this will be open and transparent, which was my ask. And to say that I suggested that the experts will be experts, I don't know who they're going to be. So the folks who are saying that they've been offered a seat at the table, they don't even know the terms of the table or who else will be there or whatnot, right? So that hasn't come out yet. So please don't put words in my mouth. I will support a sustainable future, I will support good government, and I will support appropriate planning that is not based on urban sprawl, developer wish lists, favors, snuggles, or golf games. So that's what I'll support. You let me know when I have that opportunity. Thank you.